All right, good afternoon. We're continuing on our series of great Bible events, and we're going to be in the last couple chapters of Judges, chapters 19 and 20. Not necessarily going to be reading any of it, but the lesson comes out of Judges, chapters 19 and 20. And we're going to talk kind of about some of the strangest stories in the Bible, and focusing a little bit on the story of when the tribe of Benjamin almost became extinct. You know, the book of Judges is it's one of those books in the Bible that not too many people really study a whole lot, don't even read it a whole lot. And even that being true, there are some familiar stories in there. The story of Samson, most of us are familiar with. The story of Gideon is in there, and most of us are familiar with that. But most of the stories in Judges are little known and not very well remembered stories. There are a lot of things in this because we don't often sit down and study out of the book of Judges. You know, most of us do most of our study out of the New Testament, not as much out of the Old Testament. But there are some good stories there. And because we don't read the book of Judges very often, whenever you do read it, it's somewhat shocking, some of the things that you find there. The book of Judges by itself makes the Bible rated R, or not even X. It's pretty graphic stuff in the book of Judges. So there's some pretty strange stories we find there. And if we're going to go through the Bible and pick out some of the strangest stories, maybe the top 10 of the strangest stories are found in the book of Judges. You know, in the book of Judges we find the story of a young lady named Jael, who, while a warrior who was against Israel but was friendly with her husband, was staying in her tent. She takes a hammer and a tent spike and drives it through his temple and nails him to the ground. That's a pretty strange story, you know, and so strange but yet so famous that when the songs of Deborah are sung, Jael is definitely mentioned as the most blessed of women and the most blessed of tent dwellers, unlike poor Sisera, who got the tent stake through his temple. He's not very blessed of tent dwellers anymore. Then there's the story of Jephthah, who went out to war, and he vowed a vow to God and said, "Lord, if you'll let me be victorious in this battle, I will go home, and whatever meets me at the gate, that I will offer to you as a burnt sacrifice." Of course, the Lord was with him, and he was victorious. And as he arrived home, what would meet him at the gate but his only child, his young daughter? So he ended up sacrificing his young daughter to the Lord as he had promised. And then we also have the story of Jair. Most people don't know about Jair because it takes about 2 or 3 verses of the Bible, but it's an interesting story, and I wish they could give us a little bit more about it because it sounds really interesting. All we know about Jair is that he has 30 sons that ride 30 donkeys and they rule 30 cities. There's got to be more to that story there than that, but that's all they tell us. But the strangest story of all, I would have to say, is what closes the book of Judges in chapters 19 and 20. You know, here we have a story about a man who has a concubine. You know, and a concubine is something like a wife, but not quite. She's something like a slave, but not quite. She's something like a mistress, but not quite. Well, anyways, this man has this concubine, and she decides she's fed up with the guy and goes home to her daddy. And the man goes to get her. He goes to retrieve her and tries to get her to come back. And after a few days, she agrees to go back with him. But that in and of itself is strange enough, but that's not even the end of the story. It keeps going on. On the way home, they decide to stop in a city of the Benjamites and stay in a stranger's home. And while they're staying in this stranger's home, a gang of homosexual men come and surround the house and bang on the door and demand that the man be brought out, that they might have homosexual sex with the man in the stranger's house. Of course, the owner says, "That's disgraceful. You can't do that to this man. How about you take my daughter?" Again, the strangeness just keeps going on to us. "How about you take my daughter?" Well, the men outside didn't like that, and they just got mad and more angry. So the man opens the door, throws out his concubine, and closes the door and locks it behind her. It just keeps going on. So this group of men outside abuse and rape this poor woman all night long. And as the day ends, as the evening comes to a close, the men leave and the woman struggles and climbs back to the front door, finds it locked and collapses and dies on the front porch. And if that's not strange enough, when the man wakes up in the morning, comes out the door, sees the woman lying there, and he says, "Get up, let's go home." She doesn't answer him. So he picks up the body, takes it home with him, cuts it into 12 pieces, ships it off to all the tribes of Israel as a testimony against what had happened in this place. And as this keeps going on, as baffling as this is, it's still not the end of the story. This strange story just keeps getting stranger. You know, as he sent off this to the 12 tribes of Israel, 400,000 men of Israel gather to war against the tribe of Benjamin because of this act. Not necessarily because of the act that had happened, but because the tribe of Benjamin decided to do nothing about it, even though it was in their territory. And since they decided to do nothing about it, the rest of Israel said, "We're going to go war against the tribe of Benjamin." So they have 400,000 men to go attack the tribe of Benjamin. And after a series of battles, all but 600 men of the whole tribe of Benjamin have been extinguished. 600 men is all that's left, and they go and hide themselves in the hills. And to ensure that the tribe was going to be utterly destroyed, the rest of the tribes of Israel made a pact one with another, that we're not going to give unto these men any of our daughters so that they could not marry, so they would not be able to have any more children, and that would be the end of the tribe of Benjamin. Well, that sounds like a fitting end of the story, but it didn't even end there. It just continues. You know, Israel began to regret what it had done. It started to think that the tribe of Benjamin is on the verge of being wiped out, of being extinct. And after all, there's supposed to be 12 tribes of Israel, not just 11. And they were one generation away from only being 11 tribes of Israel. So the rest of Israel makes peace with the tribe of Benjamin. And now, they still have 600 men, and they made a pact before God that they can't give them any wives, so they still can't give them any wives, but how are they going to see that the tribe of Benjamin survives? They decide to stand back and watch and do nothing while they tell these 600 men that there's about to be the festival in Shiloh. You 600 men go down there while they're having the festival, and the young ladies come out to do their dances in the fields. Go out and kidnap yourselves wives, and we'll stand back and we'll do nothing. So the story just continues to disintegrate into strangeness. Now finally, that is actually the final end of all the strangeness going on back in the days of Israel. And as we read this story, I tend to be someone who likes to read and to watch science fiction movies, and you kind of read this, and you almost think you're in a science fiction novel or something, not because there's some scientific fact or some great advance, but because it seems so strange to us, these events, that surely this couldn't have happened on our planet, the planet Earth. It must have happened on some planet far, far away, long, long ago, you know, as most of the science fiction novels like to start out. But we read this, and we just want to think that it's so alien to us. Nothing at all like what we're used to. Nothing at all like what we would want to see. You know, and we ask ourselves, well, what kind of story do we find here? What kind of story is this in the book of Judges? You know, at first, maybe it feels like a love story. The woman runs off to her daddy, and the man comes back to get her. He wants to get back the woman in his life. But of course, as you read on, you find out certainly not really a love story, because no man that really loved a woman would send her out to the fate that she was to meet. Well, definitely this is a violent story. We have all kinds of things. We have rape, we have murder, we have genocide, all kinds of violence going on here. Well, it's difficult to know exactly what is this story about, and it's because it's just so contrary to everything that we would think of as appropriate or normal or useful. But as we look at it, and you look underneath the motivations what was going on in this story, the motivations behind each person's actions or each group's actions, and maybe those motivations aren't so foreign to us after all. Now, the actions that they actually ended up taking might be foreign, but the motivations behind it may not be quite so foreign. There may be more of us in this story than we would want to admit. You know, when you strip away all the different cultural differences that were in play here, and we get down to the heart of the story, what is the story all about? It's all about a people in search of justice. A people looking for some justice in the circumstances they found themselves in. You know, here they are in the land of Israel in the day of the Judges when there was no king. The book of Judges repeats that phrase over and over again, and there was no king in the land of Israel. There was no king, and there was no justice. And so, more than anything else, the people wanted to see some type of justice. You know, it's commendable to want to see justice. Now, after all these events I've just laid out to you, that's probably the only commendable thing you'll find in this story is a search for justice. But ultimately, what they wanted was justice. You know, if there was justice, then a man traveling far from home wouldn't be threatened by attack from a gang if there was justice. So in search of justice, this man stays behind the safety of locked doors and throws out the woman to the crowd. But now if there was justice, then a woman wouldn't be treated like some worthless property to be thrown out to a gang of miscreants that was going to have their way. So in search of justice, the nation of Israel goes out to destroy a whole tribe of people. And if there were justice, a whole tribe of people would not face extinction. So in search of justice, their neighbors stand by and let them kidnap a bunch of women. And of course, if there is justice, there would never be a need for such an act, and there would never be anyone who would turn away a blind eye to such an act. So the people in this story are all just searching for justice. Which there's nothing wrong with searching for justice, but they're prevented from finding justice because their minds are so perverted from the truth that they don't really know what justice is. They wouldn't even know justice if it was standing them and staring them right in the face. So, if we want to find justice in the world, there's nothing wrong with that. That is a good thing to do. But the first step we have to do if we really want to find justice is we have to understand what justice really is. Now, we look at this Bible study, and you look at the last two chapters of Judges, and we can find three common misconceptions about the subject of justice. The first misconception is that justice is something that protects you. Justice is for me. Forget about everybody else. I'm the one who needs justice. You know, in this story, the man is threatened, and in a sense of what is just, he protects himself by staying behind locked doors, and he throws a woman outside to meet her fate while he goes ahead and sleeps because he's got to travel in the morning. To him, that's justice. The purpose of justice, so in his mind, was that he would be protected. But that's not what justice is. You know, but do we sometimes find ourselves thinking that way? It doesn't matter what happens to somebody else as long as I'm protected. As long as I have my freedoms. We think there's justice in the world if we're protected from harm. You know, we forget about the poor. We forget about racial hatred. We forget about somebody who's just lost their job. But justice in the world protects me. Justice in the world protects my freedom. Justice in the world protects my job. You know, we like to think that justice in the world means that God is watching over me. But that's not really true. Even though it's not far from the truth. Justice is not just God watching over me, but justice is God watching over all of us. You know, in Judges, the people thought that justice was a way of getting protection for yourself. And since if justice was indeed simply a way of getting protection for yourself, then the man would have been justified at throwing the woman out, because he would have been protecting himself. Psalms 99 speaks of a God who loves justice, who has established equity. Justice must be for all. If justice isn't for all, it just becomes perverted and not truly justice. The man in Judges had a right to feel that he should be protected from evil, but his mistake was that he felt so self-centered, so drawn into himself, that he thought his right to be protected superseded that of the woman's. For justice to be true, it must be for all people. So just like the man had a right to be protected, so did the woman. If we want justice for ourselves, that's good, that's fine. But we need to make sure that we don't gain it at the expense of somebody else. As we work for justice for us, as we want justice for ourselves, if we want true justice in our community, in our world, in our nation, we have to make sure that it's equal for all. Now, the second misconception people have about justice is that they think that justice means permissiveness. The tribe of Benjamin becomes the focus of the anger of the rest of the neighbors. They become the focus of the anger of Israel, not because of the rape and murder, but because of the fact that they stood by and did nothing about it. They didn't do anything. They didn't act about it. They didn't come in and they didn't come looking for this gang of people. That's kind of what the situation that we find ourselves in as a nation. We're pointing to other nations and saying that they're at fault because they're allowing terrorist activities to occur within their boundaries and not doing anything about it, which is the same situation we have here. Tribe of Benjamin had this gang of people operating within their borders, and they weren't doing anything about it. And that made the rest of Israel mad. The purpose of justice, so the tribe of Benjamin thought, was permissiveness. We like to think that justice means that I get to do my thing the way I want to do my thing. What's right for me is right for me. What's right for you is right for you. That is how some people misconstrue justice. But permissiveness is not justice. And why do people even think that? Well, because justice goes hand in hand with mercy. If you're going to have justice, you have to have mercy. They go hand in hand. But mercy is not the same thing as permissiveness. Mercy doesn't permit someone to move into the future unbridled, doing whatever they want, whenever they want. What mercy does is mercy reaches back into our past and heals our broken souls, heals us from our past disobediences. Mercy is not a free license to do what we want in the future, but it's forgiveness for the bad we've done in the past. Permissiveness, on the other hand, is a free license, and that is not what justice is. Again, in Psalms 99, we read that God loves justice. It says in Psalms 99, "Thou dost establish equity. Thou executest judgment and righteousness in Jacob." And in verse 8 it says, "Thou wast a God that forgavest them." There is no permissiveness in justice. But there is mercy wherever there's justice. The third misconception many people have about justice is that it is the same thing as revenge. In the biblical story, the nation of Israel decided to destroy the tribe of Benjamin. Revenge, they think, is what justice is all about. We're going to get back at these people for what they've done. What 25,000 lives for one, right? That's what revenge will do to you. But again, this is not so alien to our way of thinking. Some of us like to think that, if you're going to push me, I'm going to shove you back. You take something from me, I'm going to take 2 times fold from you. Revenge. But again, Psalms 99 says that God is a forgiving God. Though He punishes the people for their misdeeds. Even though He's a forgiving God, He still punishes people for their misdeeds. Now, some people don't see a difference there. Punishment, revenge, are they not the same thing? What is the difference? Well, revenge is getting even. Revenge is inflicting hurt upon someone for something they've done to you. Revenge is done out of spite and with a fist and with meanness in one's heart. That's revenge. Punishment, however, those of us that are parents know this, punishment is meant to build up. It's intended to help someone correct their own mistakes, to move beyond their mistakes, move beyond their errors in their past, and become a more productive, a closer person with a better relationship, to restore a broken relationship. That is what punishment is. Punishment and revenge are not the same thing. You know, we have a God, and this God who is our King, He is a God who loves justice. In Psalms 99, it did say, "Thou wast a God that forgavest them, though thou tookest vengeance on their inventions." It said He forgavest them, even though He took His vengeance against the things that they had done. He did punish them. God did correct the children of Israel, but He still forgave them and He still loved them. So if we want to find justice in this world, that's good, that's fine. But the first step for us to truly find justice in the world is first of all to strip away all the different misconceptions there are about justice. To strip away the false ideas about justice. And to understand that it is for all people. And it has to go hand in hand with mercy. But it has to also go hand in hand with punishment and discipline. And that's where justice comes from. Now in the book of Judges, most of the stories in the book of Judges, as I had mentioned before, start with the same formula. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel." And the book of Judges ends in the last verse of the book of Judges saying the same thing. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes." Now, if we want to find justice, we can't do what's right in our own eyes. We have to do what's right in the eyes of the Lord. You know, Psalms 99 tells us that we have a king, and this king is our God, and He is a God that loves justice. He loves real justice. And He wants us to seek justice for all. As we like to say is the mantra of our country, justice for all. And to have true justice, we have to have a God that will put out not only the punishments, but also His mercy. And that is one of the strangest stories of the Bible. So let's stand. We'll be dismissed in a word of prayer.